Hello crafty people, it's Sharon here again, and today I'm coming to you with a new card, this time with an autumnal feel, featuring lovely Tracey stamps and with some techniques that we haven't done before, such as creating a background, and we're going to revisit masking and a little bit of watercolouring. So before I begin, I'll just show you what I've used today. So first of all, we have the Tracey stamps. This is an A6 size stamp set called Falling For You, and we're going to be using the rabbit and the leaves as well to create that background that you just saw. And there are a variety of sentiments on here, which I'll just bring up so you can see. But I'm actually going to use some other sentiments that I've got, which are from Woodware, and these are called More Wishes. So there we go. That's just a variety of birthday type wishes, which are a slightly larger font, which is what I kind of wanted for this card. So before we begin, I'll just put in place a list of everything that I've used, so that you can take a snapshot of that if you want to. I've basically used Crafter's Companion Aquapens for my colouring, and a couple of their Harmony ink pads as well, and obviously the stamps that I've just mentioned. So first of all, we're going to start by creating a background. So I'm just going to clear my bits of paper out of the way, because this is going to get a little bit messy. So for this technique, what you will actually need is a non-porous surface, so a glass mat like this, or if you haven't got a glass mat, if you've got a piece of acetate handy, you could use that. If you've got a flattish plate, you could use that. So what we're going to do is pick some autumnal colours, which I have already chosen from my aqua pens, and these are the ones I've got. So I've got gold, amber, sunset and chestnut. And what I'm going to do first of all is just start to scribble some of this ink onto my glass mat. Now it may feel like it's wasting it, but actually it hardly uses any. So I'm just going to start scribbling away randomly, putting a few blobs on there. And I'm starting with my lightest colour first, which is gold. Then I'm going to my next lightest colour, which is amber in this case. I'm filling in some of the gaps. And the lovely thing about this is that every one that you do is going to come out slightly different. Then on to my next colour, which is scarlet. Making sure I pick the brush end of the pen. And again, just throwing in some. And depending if you want it to be overall darker or lighter, you can vary the amount of colour that you're putting in. And finally, I'm going in with chestnut, which is a brown, as the name would suggest. And I'm throwing in some of that as well. Now I'm using watercolour card for this technique, because it will absorb into the paper better, but you can use a good standard thick card if you want to, just whatever you've got to hand really. So the next trick is that we're going to wet this ink. So I've got a giant paper sprayer here, so water sprayer, sorry, but you don't need a large one. There we go, and you'll see that the colours start to diffuse, and at that point we're going to just take our card and dip it into that inky mix. Now you can pick where you want to go a little bit. I'm going to go like this because I want to have a bit of a slant to my ink when it goes down. So I'm just touching it in, tap, 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 and lifting it up. And there we have a coloured background. And if you want to add a little bit more, or if you can dab off if you wish, you can go back in for a little bit more. I'm going to go up here and add a little bit more depth of colour if you want to, just by tapping. And I'm just going to quickly clean this up and then we're ready to go on to the next stage. So what I want to do is add a little bit of texture to this. So whilst it's still wet, I'm going to take my water and my fan brush, dip my fan brush into the water, and then tap it over my inky area. And what you might start to see is that it starts to draw out the ink and leave little white areas. So the next thing I'm going to do is just blot that. And then the tough part is we have to be patient and let that dry. You can do it with a heat gun, of course, if you want to, but for the sake of speed, I've actually prepared one earlier in good old-fashioned Blue Peter style. So I'll just put that aside to dry, take out my pre-prepared one, and here's the one that I'd finished earlier, all ready for stamping. Now, as you can see with this, I've made a slightly lighter colour than I have with my original version, so it's really up to you, and that just varies depending on how much ink you actually put onto how much water you put onto your ink when you've coloured it onto your mat. So my next stage is that I'm going to start doing some stamping, and we're also going to use the masking technique for this. So I'm just going to put my card in place. I'm going to have my rabbit down here, and she's going to be looking up here, and there's going to be flurries of leaves as if they're blowing away. So let's get our rabbit ready. One little rabbit, and I'm just putting her where I want her to be, making sure that her feet are reasonably straight, and maybe I'm just going to bring her up a little bit. So that's her in position, and because I'm going to watercolour her, I'm going to use a VersaFine to actually stamp her. So just a little bit off shot here, but I'm just going to ink up my rabbit. And press her down. Give her a nice press because the watercolour card has got texture on it, so it might need a little moment just to sink in. Of course, if you're using a stamping platform, you can double stamp and go back again in the same way, but I think that's a pretty good image. So let's take her away, and the next thing I want to do is to put my sentiment in position. So I'm just going to move my magnets for a moment and then grab my sentiment. So I'm have a wonderful day filled with happiness, which is a good generic kind of sentiment which you could use for birthdays or just as a general greeting. And I'm going to use my old trick of putting it on the slant rather than putting it straight, because if I get it slightly wonky it's going to be really obvious. So wherever I get the chance, I like to put my sentiments at a jaunty angle, as they say. So let's just put that down, give that an ink up as well. Sorry about that, I knocked the camera there. And again, if it doesn't come out quite right the first time, because I'm using a stamping platform, it holds everything in place. I can go back in for a second stamp. and I am going to just give that another little re-ink just to deepen that colour. There we go. So that's much more solid. Let's get rid of that one as well. And do the cleanup later. So next I'm going to start to add some extra bits and pieces. And before I begin, I want to protect my little rabbit by adding a mask. I have got a mask demonstration in one of my previous videos, which was Halloween gnomes, where there are ghosts and things and a graveyard. So if you flip back to that one, you'll see it. But what I'll try and do is make another quick video just telling you purely how to make a mask. But not today, unfortunately. So if you're watching this after the event, you might find that's already on my list of videos. So there we go. I've covered over my rabbit with some sticky masking paper, and what that means is that anything I do now is not going to make that image get dirty. And the reason I'm doing that is, first of all, I want to put a ground line in for her. And you can see here that I've got a scrap of card that I've just randomly ripped, and I'm going to use that to create a ground line. But I don't want it to be just a straight line. I want to have a little background involved with it. So I'm making a few different layers as if there's little ridges and hills in the background. Now the key to note when you're putting an animal on the ground is not to put it on top of the ground. The ground's got to come up around it. So if I just zoom in a little bit, you can see I'm placing my card above the line of the feet, and that's why we need the mask, because otherwise we'd end up with green feet, which we don't really want. So if I just bring in my ink pad, this is a Harmony ink pad, and it's called Grasshopper. It's a nice soft sort of green. So I'm dipping my stencil brush in, and I'm just coming in gently, starting a little bit in from the end here and just coming along and sort of fading out. If I hold on to my piece of card, I can lift up and see how it's going. Might just put a little bit more. I dab off so I don't get too much of a sudden blob of ink. There we go. And now I'm going to change the angle by using another bit of my card, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going in sort of circular motions. You can swipe side to side if you want, but that will give a more solid end at the bottom here, and I really want that to be quite soft. So again, I'm just picking up and having a look, and you can see I've made an error there because now it looks like she's floating. So I'm going to add some more. I'm just going to pick another bit of my card. There we go. To make sure that she's actually grounded. Let's have a look. Need to add a bit more. Can't really see that. I am going to add something to this later, which is going to help with that feeling of grounding, but you can just about see now that her feet are just below this line. Now my next stage is I'm going to bring some brown in, and this one is also Craft Companion, and this one's called Friar Brown. It's quite a rich reddy brown, so let's put that there. And I'm going to go back to where we started doing her feet, and I'm going to just dab in a little bit of brown in there just for some contrast. So you can imagine that if I didn't have that mask on her right now, that would be a complete hot mess. There we go. So you kind of get the idea. And then I'm just adding a bit there just to fade out. And in the end, I'm going to go with probably a little bit of grey shadow just below here as well, just to add even more. But I'm going to do that right at the end. So that's my ink pads finished with. Next, I'm going to stamp the leaves on. So for this, I'm just going to use a small plastic acrylic block rather than a stamping platform, because otherwise you'd be spending all your time moving it around. I'm going to take the biggest leaf of the three first, which happens to be this sort of three-sided one, and I'm going to start randomly stamping. I find it's easier to start with the biggest ones and spread them out when you're doing this sort of cluster effect, and then you can fit the little ones in the middle to make them look more random. So I'm going to stamp one on the floor here, which is just going over her feet, and you'll obviously that will be protected by the mask. And then I'm going to gradually start adding a few more, twisting and turning so that all the leaves are not in the same direction, and not doing too many at this stage, and also avoiding the sentiment. So I think I'm going to add another one up here. And you can see that I've missed a bit there, but we don't have to worry about that, because I can either go back in with my leaf very carefully, or I can add it in with a black pen and draw it. But I think I've just about gotten away with that. Luckily, because these are quite sketchy, Tracey's designs are sketchy, it leaves you a lot of room for correcting little mistakes like that. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perhaps I'll just put another one floating off up here, making sure that you go off the edge of the page so that it looks more realistic. So I'm just going to clean off my acrylic block because I don't want to get black smudges on my main image. And then I'm going to swap to my medium sized leaf, which is sort of, I think you could call it an oak tree leaf. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing and start filling in some more gaps. So I'm going to put another leaf on here as if it's blowing away behind her. Another one blowing away just round her head. And just randomly start stamping a few more. I want it as if there's been a gust of wind that's blown everything away. And I'm twisting and turning again. Trying not to have two going the same way at the same time. I'm going to have one floating away over here as well. Okay, so that's leaf number 2. Again, I'm just going to take a little bit of ink, make sure I don't leave any residue on my little acrylic block. And finally, the smallest leaf, and I can just use this to fill in anywhere I think needs a little bit extra. So one there, one going off the top here, maybe a little one there, and I think that probably is enough. So we're now ready almost to start painting. So I've just had a little bit of a tidy up, and now I'm going to start colouring my image. So what you can see here is I've still got my little mask. I'm going to peel that away and reveal my image underneath, which should be nice and clean. So you can see that at the bottom her feet are still white, ready for painting. The leaves aren't, but I'm not worried about that, and we'll see why that is in a moment. But first of all, I'm going to start painting my little rabbit. I've decided to make her a brown rabbit, but different shade of brown to the chestnut that I used before. So I'm going to take my tan aqua pen, and I'm going to, on my little piece of mylar, put some of that down. I've dipped my water in my brush, which I can't fit it all in, unfortunately. There we go. And then I'm dipping on a piece of cloth, and then I'm going to use my paintbrush to pick up some of that paint, and I'm just going to put a very light wash starting from the edges of her face and bringing in. And if you run out of water, just do another little dip and a dab to do that. And if you run out of paint, obviously you can pick up some more. And I would say just start at the edges, because naturally that's going to be the darkest area. So that came out quite strong there. But what we can do is bring in the damp brush and just keep drawing out and out. And the idea is that as you get to the centre of the face, it's almost white. In fact, you can leave a little white area in there to highlight her features, which makes her look rounded and friendly. And then we're going to just leave that for a moment and let it dry for a second. Move on to another area that needs the brown or the tan. So I'm going to do her arm, in exactly the same way. Now what I'll do now is I'm going to zoom in a bit, because you can get the idea of me picking up the paint and moving, but I want you to just be able to see the image a little bit more clearly. So I'm going to zoom right in now, bring her more into focus. So just remember, no matter what colour pen I'm using, I'm going to do exactly the same process. So I am going to dip my paintbrush in water, give it a little dab because it only wants to be slightly damp, pick up some of my paint off my mylar, and starting from the dark areas of shadow, put my ink down and then move it out. And we're going to go back and do this a few times. It's not the kind of thing you can do all in one go. I also need to remember her little tail there. And I'm going to do her feet. She could have shoes on under her trousers, but I've decided just to leave her with her feet. And then we've got her her ears to think about as well. So I'm going to start that off with a peachy colour, which is Spice. And again, I'm applying that to my mat and following the same process. So I'm going to dip in the water, just dab off the excess and pick some of it up, and I'm just going to go into the middle of her ears so that I can get a slight feeling of pinkiness. And when you're colouring, you know, don't be afraid to move the paper around to suit you. So that's the middle of her ears, just there, and those lines are going to fade out eventually. Next, I'm just going to leave that to dry for a second and move on to my leaves, and I'm going to break my cardinal rule, which is that you never colour directly onto the paper with an aqua pen, but on this occasion I want these leaves to be very bold against the background, so I am actually going to put a base layer of gold down on all of my leaves so that they'll have a glow and a solidness. And if I can just bring out my example quickly, that's kind of the effect that you're going to get. They stick out from the background. If I watercoloured them down completely, they would just fade into the background because they're the same sort of colours. So, taking my brush nib, I'm just going to go over all of them with my golden pen, and it doesn't matter that there's colour underneath because I'm actually putting a much stronger layer of colour on top. So it will either look like mottling, which is quite good for autumn leaves, or it won't show at all. So, but as you can see immediately, that's popping them out from the background that we've created behind. So I'm just going to keep going, and I'm conscious I have got this zoomed in, so if I disappear off camera, just know that all I'm doing is colouring in these little leaves. I'm doing the same on the ones that are on the white area as well. And the good thing about colouring autumn leaves is that you don't have to be precious about what they look like. You know, when you see the leaves falling, they're all sorts of colours. They're not in any particular pattern. They could be a bit broken. So it's quite nice, sort of liberating experience to colour a few autumn leaves. And coming down to these one at the bottom, same rules apply because I've put a pale background there. I'm just going to colour straight over the top, and it's not causing an issue at all. There we go. So that's the base layer of those leaves done. Now this has had a little moment to dry, I'm going to go back in and apply another layer of tan. So I've dipped in my paintbrush in the water, dabbed it off, and doing exactly the same process, but what will happen is we'll get a slightly darker hue because I'm layering up. And remember, like in real life, where you've got something on top of your head, it would cast a little bit of shadow. So I've made it darker around here under her hairband, darker down by her cheeks and under her chin. And if it does go a little bit blotchy, it doesn't really matter because this is a furry animal, isn't it? So, you know, you can get away with these kind of things. But all you need to do is take a damp brush and just a very almost dry brush and just move it around a little bit. So you can see now she's got a much darker area. And I'm just adding a little bit more here, and this is a very pointy brush, so it's really nice. You can pick up the tiniest little bit of ink and just, you know, baby steps. And in a moment I'm going to come in with something even darker to cast a little bit more shadow, and I'm going to follow the same process with her arms. And then just clean my brush off, just with water now, and just bring it out a little bit. And if you need to add a little bit more colour, then you can do that as well. It just depends if you want more defined lines or a softer blend. Everybody has a different style. and honestly you could sit here tinkering with this all day long if you wanted to, so it's up to you how much time you want to spend on it. I'm now moving up to her ears where we haven't got any of the tan just yet, so I'm picking up some of that and just putting a base layer of tan in and just touching over the edges of that peachy colour, which was spice. That is coming stronger, but that's okay. And we'll just leave those to settle for a moment. And meanwhile, let's go back to our leaves. The key with watercolour is don't do pieces that are right next to each other when you've got something wet next to it, because you might end up with the colours running together. So it's always a good plan to just keep moving around and changing where you're working. Now for my leaves, I'm actually using pretty much the same colours that I used for my background, as I mentioned. So I've already done the gold, and now I'm going to add in chestnut, moss to get some green, and maybe a bit of amber for some oranginess. We'll see. So I'm going to scribble all three of those onto my mat, just so I've got them ready and I can dab in and out as I please. So that's my chestnut, my moss, and my amber. So I've got a green, a russet colour and an orange to add on top of that gold. So if I just zoom out a little bit, always go the wrong way when I do that, so you can see my colour palette. And I'm going to adopt the same process, but on these leaves I'm just going to colour them really loosely. So I'm going to pick a colour. In this instance it's going to be the green. I've dabbed my water, and then I'm just going to randomly blob. I'm not painting, I'm just blobbing colour on there, because these might have bits of green on them, they might have, there's no rules about where the light's shining or anything like that. Just some of them are green, some of them are going to be brown, and everyone's going to be slightly different. So this is very quick and easy to do, and it's a handy thing to be doing while we're just waiting for the rabbit to dry off a little bit. And remembering, if you need to, you might need to re-dip your paintbrush in water just to pick up a bit more of that ink if it's not moving. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to some brown. I'm going to add areas of brown in, much the same. And as you can see, these leaves are coming out much bolder than the background behind. I'm being quite generous with my ink. It's not too watered down because I want to keep that bold feeling, but just enough water to get it moving around on my paintbrush. So very quick to do. Just need to refresh my water on my brush. And I'm going over my green in some places, so you get another shade yet again. And then finally I might add a little bit of the amber but I honestly don't think I need too much of this really. So all these leaves look very sort of crispy and gnarled and broken. That's kind of the idea, like they're about to flake and fall into little pieces. And as I'm adding, it's just slowly merging the colours together a little bit. There, I think the leaves are good. So I'm just going to wipe those colours up and make a bit of room on my little palette. And come back in. So you can see it's starting to build now. And the next thing I'm going to do is to give her a little bit more darkness around her face. In this case, I don't think she needs too much because I've managed to get quite a dark look around her hairband. But I'm going to add a little bit because that's what I did on my other one. And I'm using sepia, or sepia, which is a sort of darker brown. So again, same process. Dip in the water, dab off, pick up, and I particularly want to go in where there would be a lot more shade. So under her chin, her sleeves, her arms, and under those boots, trousers even. My words are terrible today, I am sorry. And then when I want to blend that in, I can use plain water, or I can pick up a bit of the tan just to soften that transition. So that's what I'm doing here, picking up a bit of the tan. And that's gone a bit over the top there, but that's fine. We can smooth that out just by adding a bit more water. So I'm just dipping in water now, and then I'm just going to soften her arm just here because it left a bit of a solid edge. And then I'm going to just do the same here on this darkest side of her face. So this is the sepia. Dip in my brush to clean it off a bit, add in a little bit of tan, and then just bringing that in to soften out. And then you'll see that she starts to look a bit darker. And again, you know, I've painted this on my other card, and each one comes out a little bit different. You're never going to make an exact duplicate with watercolour, and that's part of the fun of it. That's what makes it individual. There we go. And we mustn't forget about her ears. So at this point, I think I will go straight in with the darkest colour, the sepia, and we're just going to add some shadow. Now I'm not going to worry about the pink bit, the peachy bit at this stage. I'm going to come in and add some charcoal grey in a bit, just to soften that down. I might need to come back to those ears in a minute because they're not quite as textured. So I'm just going to pause for a second while I let this dry, and then we're going to go on to the dungarees and the headband. So obviously I want to make sure that my rabbit area is dry before we progress with that. So I've given it a few minutes to dry, and now I'm going to start on my dungarees, which I've decided to do in the colour teal. And once again, I'm going to put some of this onto my palette, which is my little piece of mylar. And I'm also going to get some charcoal, which is a deep grey. I'm going to put that on there as well. because I want to use that to create shadow. So my paintbrush is coming out of the water again. I've dabbed it on the cloth, picking up some of this blue, and again I'm starting by outlining the darkest areas, although with this colour a lot of it's going to fade out, I think, but that's okay. Each colour reacts slightly differently. So there you can see that dark area has sort of faded away. Sorry, shaky hand there. So I'm zooming in just so you can get a bit of a closer view of what I'm doing. So again, much like the face, starting out at the darkest area and then fading out to white or almost white where I think the light would shine, which would be on her little belly and also at the middle of her trouser legs there, like that. Now this is very pale at this stage, and that's fine because we're going to, just like with the other areas, add to it. So while that's having a little rest for a moment, a good time to start on her headband, and for that I've used scarlet and burgundy. So I'm going to grab my scarlet, put a little bit of that on my palette, and the scarlet is going to be the sort of base coat. So I've dipped in my water again, and this is a very small area, so I'm just applying a general little coat of colour just to get us started, and on the bow. Now just be careful with red to make sure you do wash it out well on your paintbrush when you finish, because the red will get into everything if you're not careful. So just give your paintbrush a good swish in the water before switching back to the blue, because we don't want a brown sludgy colour on her dungarees. There we go. So that's started her headband. Now I'm going to go back to my dungarees, so I'm just going back forth all the time. Nearly picked up the red then, but just saved myself in time, and recoating with the dark colour. And you could do these dungarees green or brown or any colour you want really. I just wanted to make mine look a bit like denim. And as I'm going, I'm just thinking, well, where would they be darker? And you can, like I say, you can blend, or you can leave it quite blocky, I suppose is the word, without so much soft blending. And that's kind of what I'm doing with her trousers and her dungaree bits. Just making them a bit stronger in colour with less of a blend, so it doesn't look so fluffy. And there we go. And now I'm going to go back to my headband. I'm going with my darker colour, which is burgundy, because I really can't get any more deeper shade with the red. Sometimes you do need 2 or 3 colours just so you can get some variation, but still using the same process. So under the bow I expect it to be very dark, and where the headband disappears behind her head, and where the shadow of the knot is and the creases. There we go. Then I can blend a little bit more with my scarlet if I wish to, which I think is nice on the sides here, and just on that area there. But again, I'm not blending too much. I want it almost to look like there's some creases in the ribbon, like it's a satin ribbon or something. And I'm going to go straight in with some charcoal grey and just add it in the very darkest areas, just for a little bit of drama, but only the tiniest amount. And still on my charcoal grey, back to my dungarees, and I'm going to put some grey on those as well, once again to create some shadow in the darkest areas. And then back to my blue, just to bring that out a little bit, take away the harsh edges of the grey. Now if it's not moving, it means you just need to dampen your brush again. There we go. And I did mention I might put a little bit of grey at the base of her ears as well. And my last touch for the painting is going to be to add a little bit more depth where she's standing, so that she looks properly grounded. And to do this, I am using my charcoal, and I'm using it quite strongly. I'm putting down quite a blob. I'm avoiding the leaves, but I am taking that ground out beyond the leaves. I hope you can see that okay. And then I'm going to just gradually fade that out, so that she looks almost like she is casting a shadow as well. Okay, so there we have our basic card. I'm just going to come back with one final touch to add a bit more texture before we finish, but to do that I'm going to put my mask back on for a moment, but it only needs to be loosely. It doesn't even have to be exact. And I've also torn a bit of cardboard, just roughly, to cover over my sentiment. So bear with me while I just get my pens out the way, and we'll do the final part of the card. So I want to get a bit more interest in my background, so it looks like there's a bit of things flying around and this area is not so blank. And to do that, I'm going to do some splattering. I'm going to go back to my ink pad, so I'm going to use my green and my brown and my trusty fan brush. So I'm going to just put some ink down onto my glass mat or my mylar, whatever you've got handy. My brush has been in the water. I'm just going to pick up some of that ink and start tapping. And I'm going to start tapping from the bottom right, and I'm just tapping my brush all over. And the idea of putting those masks was that I don't want my rabbit to get all spotty, and I don't want my sentiment to be obliterated by spots. You know, I want it to stand clear, but I'm trying to move in the same direction as the leaves that I've done. So that's colour number 1. Now I'm going to go with my green. And I've wet my brush again, picking up the green, and you can pick up a nice, you know, you haven't got to be gentle with this, just fill your brush up, and the same process again. And you can go back and do that, you know, a number of times if you want to. And the reason why I'm doing this after is because I want these dots to stay quite solid. If I'd done them onto the wet background, they would have diffused and they wouldn't look quite so defined. So I just have to let that dry for a minute. I've removed my protective mask. And there we have it. So I'm just going to clean up again now and then just show you sticking onto the final card so you can see the end result. And here we are with a 5x7 card blank, which I've just matted sort of a burgundy colour and a green colour. The colours I picked I thought would go well with the colours I've used for my painting. So I've tried to pick out the headscarf and also the green parts of the leaves so that that will all go in there together. I'm going to now add my watercolour card on there, and I'm going to use a wet glue to stick it because it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room. If you're really confident that you can stick things straight first time, then double-sided tape is great, especially for watercolour card because it can warp a bit during the painting process. But I am not that person who gets things straight first time, so I'm going in with the glue and I'm just going to line it up inside my mats and layers. And there we have our finished card. I'm just going to zoom out and you can see all the mess on my table now, and I'll bring in my other card which I've done in exactly the same way, but you can see each one comes out a little bit different, which is a really nice part. So I hope you enjoyed that, and it's quite a long video, but I hope you learned something from it. If you like what you see, I'd love if you would subscribe to my channel. Come and visit me again, because I do try to put videos on fairly regularly, and you'll find there's quite a few on there already. So thanks very much for watching. Have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Bye.